There are stories born in the dust of country roads that rise to touch the sky. Stories of men who arrived with nothing and built empires with their own hands. Of women who were stronger than any storm. Of families who faced losses so deep they seemed impossible to bear. This is one of those stories. The story of a man who appeared on the horizon riding a tired horse, seeking an opportunity. The story of how that man built a home, a family, a legacy. But it's also the story of how life can take away everything you love in an instant, leaving you in absolute darkness. And it's the story of how I found my voice in the strings of a guitar when words were no longer enough to express the pain. Because I learned something fundamental. There's no point in a singer's chest if laughter blooms where the living consciousness of what pain is was planted. Join us on this journey through the rugged plains of Montana, where a young man discovered that music isn't an escape from suffering, but the only way to make sense of it. Leave us in the comments if you've ever found your own way to transform pain into something beautiful. Your story matters too. My father appeared in our lives the way miracles appear. Unannounced, when least expected. It was an October sunset when Mr. Harrison saw him coming down the dusty road, riding a horse that had seen better days. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky orange and pink, as if nature itself wanted to welcome this stranger who would change our destiny. Robert Varela was 25 years old, but his hands told the story of someone who had worked since childhood. Calluses upon calluses, scars from tools and thorns, strong fingers accustomed to the weight of the hoe and rope. His eyes, however, were what impressed most. They had that bright determination possessed only by those who have nothing to lose and everything to gain. He came from a town down south where drought had turned fertile land into sterile desert. He'd lost his parents to a fever that swept through his town when he was barely a 12-year-old boy. His uncle raised him, teaching him everything about working the land, but he too died 2 years back, leaving him completely alone in the world. He had no siblings, no cousins, no one. Just a horse, the clothes on his back, and a dream so big it barely fit in his chest. Mr. Thomas Harrison had a modest ranch on the outskirts of Copper Ridge, a small town lost among Montana's rugged plains. He wasn't a rich man, but not poor either. He had enough land to keep his family from going hungry, enough cattle to sell at the town market, and enough pride not to ask anyone for help. He had 5 sons, all young and strong, tireless workers who helped him keep the ranch running. And he had a daughter. Grace was the light of his eyes, the reason he worked until exhaustion, the only soft thought in his heart hardened by years of labor under the merciless sun. She was 18, with dark braids falling down her back and a smile that could light up the darkest day. When my father presented himself asking for work, removing his hat respectfully, Mr. Harrison studied him with the critical eyes of someone who's seen it all. "What can you do?" he asked without getting up from his chair on the porch. "I know how to work the land, sir," my father responded with a firm voice. "Plant, harvest, care for animals. I can repair fences, build corrals. What I don't know, I'm willing to learn. And what I do know, I'll do better than anyone." It was an honest answer, without false promises but with confidence. Mr. Harrison took his time before responding, watching to see if the young man would get nervous. But Robert stood firm, waiting patiently. "You can stay," he finally said. "But I warn you, the work is hard and I'm demanding. I don't tolerate laziness or dishonesty. If you stay, you work. And if you can't handle the work, better you leave before I send you away. You won't regret it, sir. I promise." My father took his horse to the stable, where he found fresh water and hay. Then he came to the house for dinner. He'd cleaned up as best he could, combed his dark hair back. And when he entered the room where the family was gathered, his eyes met my mother's. She was placing plates on the table, and when she saw him, something in her chest jumped. He was handsome, yes, with strong features and a defined jawline. But it was more than that. There was an honesty in his gaze, a determination in his bearing that attracted her in a way she didn't fully understand. During dinner, my mother's brothers interrogated him with the typical mixture of curiosity and distrust that country men show toward strangers. But my father responded with direct honesty, without embellishment. Yes, he came alone. Yes, he'd lost all his family. No, he didn't have his own land or saved money. He only had his hands and his willingness to work. In that silent instant when their eyes met for the second time that night, without words, without gestures, something passed between them. A recognition, a connection, the beginning of something that would change all our lives forever. The first months were constant testing. Mr. Harrison and his 5 sons, rough men forged by farm work, put my father to work on the hardest tasks, watching every movement, looking for signs of weakness or deceit. They gave him the most destroyed fences to repair, the most difficult horses to tame, the hardest land to plow. But Robert exceeded every challenge with a determination that surprised even the most skeptical. He worked from before dawn, when the world was still dark and cold, until after nightfall, when he could barely see what he was doing. He repaired fences under the scorching sun, his hands bleeding from handling barbed wire so much. He plowed land so hard it seemed like stone, his muscles screaming in pain but never complaining. His hands, already calloused when he arrived, developed new layers of hardened skin. His back ached every night when lying down on the simple cot in the barn. But every morning he got up before everyone, ready for another day of tests. And every afternoon, my mother brought him water in the field. At first it was just that, a simple act of courtesy toward the new worker. But soon it became something more. Those stolen moments under the scarce shade of a tree transformed into conversations that grew in intimacy with each passing day. "Do you miss your town?" she asked him one afternoon, handing him the jug of fresh water. He drank deeply before responding, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a worn handkerchief. Sometimes he admitted honestly, "I miss the familiar faces, the familiar places where I grew up. But there was no future for me there. The land died, the town is dying too. Here at least I have a chance." "A chance at what?" she asked, though something in her heart already knew the answer. My father looked at her directly, with an intensity that made her blush. "To build something of my own. To have land someday. To—" He stopped as if he was going to say something more but thought better of it. "To what?" she insisted gently, her voice barely a whisper. "To have a family," he finally said. "To not be alone. To have roots somewhere, to belong to something bigger than myself." "Everyone needs roots," she responded, her heart beating faster. "Without roots, we're like the wind, without direction or destiny. We roll through life never settling anywhere." "Exactly. And I've rolled enough. It's time to put down roots." There was something in the way he said it, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like maybe he was talking about more than just general aspirations. Maybe he was talking about specific possibilities, about futures that might include her. The months turned into seasons. Winter came with its freezing nights, and my father proved invaluable. He wasn't just a tireless worker, but he had skills Mr. Harrison didn't expect. He knew woodworking, and repaired not only fences but also furniture in the house. He knew about animals, curing a cow everyone thought would die. He knew about soil and plants, suggesting crop rotations that improved harvests. But more than his practical skills, it was his character that earned respect. He was honest to the core, never taking credit for work he hadn't done. He was direct but never rude, firm but never arrogant. He helped Grace's brothers without expecting thanks. He treated Mr. Harrison with respect but without servility. And he treated Grace with an old-fashioned courtesy that made her feel valued in a way she'd never experienced. Almost a full year passed before my father gathered enough courage to speak with Mr. Harrison. One afternoon after work, he found him smoking his pipe on the porch. "Mr. Harrison," he began, his voice firm but respectful, "I need to talk to you about an important matter." The old man looked at him with eyes that already knew what was coming. "Speak." "I love your daughter," my father said without beating around the bush, looking him directly in the eyes. "I've loved her almost from the first day I saw her. I know I don't have much to offer. I don't have my own land, I don't have a house, I don't have significant savings. But I can promise hard work every day of my life. I can promise loyalty, honesty, and true love toward her. If you give me your permission, I'd like to ask her to marry me." Mr. Harrison smoked in silence for a long moment that seemed like an eternity. He studied the young man in front of him, seeing in Robert the man he himself had been decades ago when he arrived at these lands with nothing but dreams. "And what would you offer her? A life in the barn, working for me the rest of your days? I would offer to build something together. It won't be easy at first, it won't be comfortable. But it will be an honest life, a life where she'll be loved and respected every day." Mr. Harrison nodded slowly, making his decision. "I have land to the east, near the river," he finally said. "It's neglected, full of brush, hasn't been worked in years. It's good land but needs a lot of effort to make it productive again." He paused, letting his words sink in. "If you marry Grace, I'll give you that land. It'll be yours, with deeds and everything. But you'll have to work it yourself, make it productive. And you'll have to build a house there for my daughter. It doesn't have to be big or fancy, but it has to be solid and worthy of her." My father couldn't believe what he was hearing. His own land. A real future. A chance to build exactly what he dreamed of. "Sir, I don't know what to say. It's more generous than I ever expected." "I'm not doing it just for you," Mr. Harrison said. "I'm doing it for my daughter. I've seen her looking at you when she thinks no one's watching. She loves you, though she's too shy to say it. And I'd rather she marry a hard-working, honest man who has nothing, than a rich man who's lazy or corrupt. I won't disappoint you, sir. Not you or Grace. I swear it on my life." That night, my father found my mother in the garden behind the house, watering plants under the moonlight. When she saw him approaching, her heart began to beat faster, knowing instinctively that something important had happened. He knelt right there in the damp garden soil, taking her hands in his. "Grace, I don't have much to offer you now. But I have my love, which is stronger than these mountains. I have your father's blessing and the promise of my own land where we'll build our home. Would you do me the honor of being my wife?" She had tears in her eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she said with a voice that was barely a whisper but contained all her heart. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They married 2 months later in a simple ceremony at the small-town church. My mother wore the wedding dress that had been her mother's, white and delicate, with lace that had yellowed slightly with the years but was still beautiful. My father wore his only suit, borrowed from one of his brothers-in-law and hastily adjusted. The celebration was modest but joyful, with music, food prepared by all the women in town, and dancing late into the night. And so they began to build. Mr. Harrison kept his promise, giving them the deeds to 50 acres of land by the river. It was good land but neglected, covered in brush that had grown during years of abandonment. Together, with occasional help from my mother's brothers, they began the arduous process of making it productive. They cleared the brush, plowed the hard earth, built irrigation channels from the river. And while they did all this, they also built their house. It wasn't large, just 3 rooms at first, with adobe walls my father mixed with his own hands. Each adobe block had been placed carefully, each beam had been personally selected, each window installed thinking about how the light would enter to brighten my mother's day. When it was finally finished, my father carried my mother across the threshold, both laughing with the pure joy of lovers. That night they slept in their own bed, in their own house, on their own land. And although they had almost nothing in terms of material possessions, they felt like the richest people in the world. In that house 5 children were born over the years. Michael was the first, a strong baby with the lungs of a bull and his father's determination. Then came me, Matthew, 2 years later. I was a calm baby, observant from the start, always watching the world with big curious eyes. Then came Sarah, the only girl, and my father's absolute joy. She was delicate as a spring flower, with my mother's dark hair and my father's expressive eyes. She had a laugh like silver bells that filled the house with music. And finally came the twins, Charles and Jacob, identical in appearance but different in temperament. Charles was the adventurer, always getting into trouble. Jacob was the cautious one, always getting Charles out of that trouble. Those were good years. Hard, because farm life is never easy but good. My father worked the land with almost religious dedication, getting up before dawn and working until darkness forced him to stop. The harvests responded to his constant care, producing enough not only to feed us but also to sell at the town market. My mother kept the house with love and unbreakable strength. She cooked, cleaned, sewed our clothes, tended the garden where vegetables and flowers grew. She raised us with firmness but also with tenderness, teaching us to work hard but also to love deeply. But what I remember most from those years are the nights. After a long day of work, when we children had been bathed and fed, we'd all gather in the living room. My father would take out his old guitar, one he'd bought in town with his first savings. He wasn't an expert musician, his fingers occasionally stumbled on the strings, but he knew enough songs to entertain us for hours. We sang together, our voices mixing in a simple but beautiful harmony that filled the house with a warmth no fire could match. Michael sang louder than everyone, his childish voice full of energy. Sarah sang softly, almost shyly, but with perfect pitch. The twins invented their own words when they didn't know the real ones, making us laugh. And I simply listened, absorbing every note, every chord, every song as if they were treasures I had to keep in my memory. A man needs music, my father would say while tuning the worn strings. Farm work is hard, it breaks the body and can break the spirit if you let it. But music reminds us why we work. It reminds us that life is more than just surviving, more than just putting one foot in front of the other. Music reminds us we're human, that we can create beauty even when surrounded by difficulty. I listened to him with big eyes, not fully understanding the depth of his words. I was just a child after all. For me, music was simply something nice we did together as a family. But years later, when I held that same guitar with trembling hands and a broken heart, when words were no longer enough to express the ocean of pain inside me, I understood perfectly what my father had tried to teach me. Music wasn't just entertainment. It was medicine for the wounded soul, the language we spoke when ordinary words failed, the way to keep our humanity when everything else conspired to rob it from us. Michael was always different from the rest of us. From childhood he showed a restlessness, a curiosity about the world beyond our plains that none of the rest of us shared. While Charles, Jacob and I were content helping my father in the field, playing among the rows of corn, building dams in the river, Michael looked toward the horizon with eyes that always seemed to be searching for something he couldn't find here. "What's beyond the mountains, Dad?" he constantly asked, pointing toward the distant peaks surrounding our valley. "More land, more towns, more people," my father would respond with infinite patience. "But nothing you can't find here in your own home." "But how do you know if you've never gone to sea?" It was a fair question, and my father didn't have an answer that satisfied Michael. Dad had traveled in his youth, had seen other places before arriving at our town and finding my mother. But once he established roots, he never felt the need to look elsewhere. For him, everything he needed was here. His family, his land, his purpose. For Michael, that wasn't enough. As he grew, his restlessness only intensified. When he turned 12, my father began seriously teaching him farm work, hoping that once Michael understood the satisfaction of hard work, the joy of seeing grow what you yourself planted, he'd be content with our life. It didn't work. Michael learned fast and worked well when asked, but his heart wasn't in it. You could see it in his eyes when he plowed, when he planted, when he harvested. He was there physically, but his mind was elsewhere, dreaming of cities he'd never seen, of lives he'd never lived. My mother noticed and worried. She talked with Michael at night, trying to understand what troubled him so much. "Mom, I love you all," Michael would say with absolute sincerity. "But I feel like if I stay here, I'm going to wither like a plant without water. There's so much world out there, so many things to see and learn. I don't want to wake up one day at 50 and realize I never left this piece of land. And what's wrong with this piece of land?" My mother would ask, hurt. "Your father built it with his own hands. It's our home, our livelihood, our legacy for you. There's nothing wrong with it, Mom. It's not enough for me. And I know that sounds ungrateful after everything Dad has worked for. But I can't help feeling what I feel." My father heard these conversations from his room, and though he didn't say much, the pain was visible in his eyes. He had worked so hard, built so much, precisely to give his children a better life, a secure future here. And now his oldest son, who should inherit all this someday, wanted to leave. I was 14 when Michael finally left. He was 16, almost a man, with the same determination in his eyes my father had when he arrived at this place decades ago. It was after a particularly good harvest, when there was enough money for my father to give him something to start with. He didn't leave angry, didn't flee in the night like a thief. He did it openly, honestly, saying goodbye to each of us with tears in his eyes but also with excitement in his voice. "It's not about you," he told the twins and me as he hugged us tight. "I love you all more than you can imagine. But I have to do this. I have to see what else is out there, discover who I am beyond being Robert Varela's son. Do you understand?" We didn't understand, not really. We were 11 and 9 respectively. For us, the whole world was our ranch, the nearby town, and maybe the city we went to twice a year. The idea of wanting more than that was incomprehensible. Sarah cried openly. She and Michael had always been close despite the age difference. He was her hero, her protector, the big brother who had carried her on his shoulders when she was small and tired. "I'm going to come back to visit," Michael promised, holding Sarah's hands. "It's not goodbye forever. I'm just going to Denver, I'm going to find work, I'm going to learn new things. And when I come to visit, I'll tell you all about it." "Okay." Sarah nodded through sobs, wanting to believe him, though something in her heart already knew that promises made in farewells are rarely kept. My mother hugged him long and hard, with silent tears running down her cheeks. "Eat well. Dress warm when it's cold. Write if you can. And remember you always, always have a home here, no matter what happens." My father was the last to say goodbye. The two men looked at each other for a long moment, everything they couldn't say with words passing between them in that charged silence. Then my father extended his hand, and when Michael took it, he pulled him into a strong embrace. "Be good," my father said, his voice hoarse with contained emotion. "Be honest. Work hard. And never forget where you come from, who you are, what values we taught you." "I will, Dad. I promise. I'll make you proud." We watched Michael walk away down the dusty road, a backpack on his back with everything he owned, walking with firm steps toward the main highway where he'd take the bus to his new life. He turned once to wave, and we all waved our hands frantically, as if the movement could maintain the connection a little longer, as if the intensity of our goodbye could guarantee his return. Then he disappeared around a curve, and he was gone. The house felt unbearably empty that night. There was an empty place at the table where Michael used to sit. His voice was missing from family conversations. His laughter was absent from the air. It was as if a piece of our family had been torn out, leaving a jagged hole that hurt every time we touched it with our thoughts. My father immersed himself in work after that, working even harder than before if that was possible. My mother said it was his way of dealing with the pain, of not having to think about the son who had left. But at night, when we gathered as a family, there was a new sadness in his music. He played songs about sons who leave and don't return, about fathers who wait for letters that never come, about homes that feel incomplete. Sarah was the light that kept our house bright even after Michael left. She was special from birth, not just because she was the only girl among 5 brothers, but because she had a gift for seeing beauty where the rest of us saw only the ordinary. She was physically fragile, born premature and always more delicate than the rest of us. The first years of her life were a constant struggle against childhood illnesses that for us were minor annoyances but for her were serious threats. My mother spent entire nights watching by her bed when she had fever, praying with an intensity that scared the other children. But Sarah survived those difficult first years. She grew into a beautiful girl, with my mother's shiny dark hair and my father's expressive eyes that seemed to capture the light. She had a laugh like silver bells that could make even the grumpiest person smile. And she had a talent everyone noticed. She saw the world differently. She drew constantly, using any available surface. In the dirt with a stick, on paper when we had it, on the adobe walls of the house when she thought no one was looking. She drew animals from the ranch, plants from the garden, people from town, scenes from our daily life. They weren't technically perfect, she was just a child, but they had life in them. They captured something essential about their subjects that went beyond mere representation. When I grow up, she'd tell us with childhood's absolute confidence, "I'm going to be a famous painter. I'm going to paint pictures so beautiful that people will come from everywhere just to see them. And I'm going to paint our whole family, this house, these mountains, so they'll never be forgotten." We didn't mock her dreams, though we knew how improbable they were. A poor girl from rural Montana becoming a famous artist was as likely as diamonds raining from the sky. But we let her dream, because dreams cost nothing and bring so much joy while they last. Sarah was 9 years old, the same age I was when Michael left, when she began complaining of stomach pains. At first we thought it was something she'd eaten, a passing annoyance that would go away on its own like all childhood annoyances. But the pains continued, worsening day by day until they became constant. She lost her appetite completely, refusing even her favorite meals. She became pale, her skin losing the healthy pink color of childhood. She began losing weight in a way that alarmed even those of us who weren't doctors. My mother took her first to the town's healer, an elderly woman who had treated all our childhood illnesses with herbs and prayers. But this time, after examining Sarah and trying all her remedies without result, the healer admitted defeat. "This is beyond my knowledge," she said sadly. "You have to take her to the town doctor." The town doctor was an old man who had seen everything in his many years of practice. He examined Sarah carefully, palpating her swollen stomach, listening to her racing heart, looking at her eyes that had lost their shine. Then he called my parents to his office while we children waited outside, filled with a terror we didn't fully understand. I didn't hear exactly what he told them, but I saw their faces when they came out. My mother was crying silently, tears running down her cheeks without making sound, as if even her crying was paralyzed by shock. My father had an expression of pure desperation I'd never seen before, as if something fundamental had broken inside him. "What's wrong?" I asked, scared by their reactions. "Sarah is very sick," my father said, his voice barely controlled. "Very, very sick." The doctor called it by a long name I didn't understand then. Years later I learned it was cancer, a malignant tumor growing in her small stomach, killing her slowly from the inside. At that time, in that place, with our limited resources, there was nothing that could be done except manage the pain and wait for the inevitable. The next 6 months were a nightmare we couldn't wake from. We watched our joyful, vibrant Sarah wither before our eyes like a flower pulled from the earth. The pains worsened constantly, requiring increasingly stronger medicines my father bought, spending money we desperately needed for other things. She stopped eating almost completely, her body rejecting even water. Her body became so thin you could see every bone under her translucent skin. But worse than the physical deterioration was watching her lose her inner light. The girl who had found beauty in everything began to see only pain. The drawing ceased because her hands no longer had strength to hold a pencil. The laughter died out, replaced by moans of pain that broke hearts. The eyes that had shone with wonder at the world became dull with constant suffering. My mother barely slept, spending every night by Sarah's bed, applying cold compresses when fever consumed her, holding her when pains made her cry, singing her lullabies as if she were still a baby. Charles, Jacob and I tried to keep everything running, to do our chores and my father's when he was with Sarah, to be strong when we wanted to cry. Sarah died on a spring morning, when the flowers she loved so much were beginning to bloom in the garden my mother tended. It was almost peaceful at the end, surrounded by the whole family. My mother held her, my father stroked her hair with trembling hands, the twins and I were at the foot of the bed, helpless but present. Her last words were whispered with what remained of her voice. "I see beautiful colors. So many colors I never saw before." Then she closed her eyes, exhaled once more with a sigh that sounded almost like relief, and she was gone. The silence that followed was the loudest I'd heard in my life. It was the silence of a heart that stops beating, of a breath that ceases, of a life that ends too soon, of a family that breaks into 1,000 pieces. A year after Sarah's death, my father began complaining of headaches. That light bothered him. Then he began having trouble seeing clearly. "Things look blurry," he'd say, squinting. The doctor examined him and gave us another devastating news. It was an eye disease with no cure. He would be completely blind within months. The deterioration was exactly as the doctor predicted. First he lost details, then colors, then his field of vision narrowed. He tried to keep working, but it was dangerous. Finally, one day while plowing the field, his vision disappeared completely. Everything went black. We brought him home to his bed. And there he stayed, He didn't want to eat, didn't want to get up, didn't want to do anything. He had given up in a way more complete than any physical surrender. Without being able to work, without being able to provide, I have no value, he told us when we tried to convince him we needed him. My mother became the pillar holding everything together. She cared for my father with infinite patience while taking the reins of the ranch. Charles, Jacob, and I worked until exhaustion to keep everything running. But there was a hole in the center of our family that nothing could fill. My father kept sinking into a darkness that was as much of the soul as of the eyes. If this story is touching your heart, if you feel it speaks of struggles you've known or pain you felt, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss stories that honor the dignity of those who work the land with their hands and carry losses in their hearts. Share this with someone who understands that music and art can heal what words cannot. And stay with us to discover the surprising ending of this journey. I was 17 when I found my father's guitar stored in a corner, gathering dust. One night, unable to sleep under the weight of so much pain, I took it out. It was out of tune, the strings old. But when I strummed my fingers across them, I felt something awaken in my chest. I remembered all those nights when we were a complete family, when my father played and we all sang. The joy that music brought, how it could make problems feel smaller. I began teaching myself to play. I had no teacher, only my memories. My fingers bled at first. The sounds I produced were clumsy. But I persisted. Every night I practiced under the stars, slowly improving. My mother heard me first. "You sound like your father when he was young," she said softly. "Play something cheerful." I need to remember that joy still exists. Music became my refuge, my way of processing all the pain. I wrote my first songs. One about Sarah and her drawings, another about Michael who never returned, another about my father lost in darkness. But the one that meant most to me was about how a man can lose sight of what really matters. We received a letter from Michael after almost 4 years. He was well, he'd gotten married. Had a son he named Robert after my father. When I read the letter to my father for the first time in 2 years, he spoke. "I'm a grandfather and I didn't even know it," he said with a hoarse voice. Then he asked something that surprised me. "Do you still have my guitar? Play something for me." With trembling hands, I played one of the songs he'd taught me when I was a child. And as I played, I saw tears run down his cheeks. "You play well," he finally said. "Better than I ever played. You have soul in your music. That can't be taught." That conversation marked the beginning of his slow recovery. He didn't become who he was, but he began to eat, to talk, to get up. The music had reached him where our words couldn't. 3 more years passed. I was 20, my hands as calloused from work as from guitar strings. People in town began to know me as the boy with the guitar. They asked me to play at weddings and funerals, at parties and celebrations. My songs, simple as they were, touched something in people. They saw their own lives reflected in my lyrics. "You have a gift," Mr. Harrison told me. "Don't waste it staying here. You need to go to the city, share your music with more people." "I can't leave my family. They need me here." "Your family will be fine. But you have something special. And it would be a crime to waste it." His words haunted me. Should I leave like Michael? But how could I abandon my family when we were barely beginning to heal? One night I talked with my parents. I told them about the offers I'd received to play in Nashville, about the people who thought I might have a future as a musician. "You sound like Michael," my father said, without bitterness. He also felt there was something beyond these plains. And though it hurt when he left, I understand it was his path. "You have a gift, son," my mother added. "It would be selfish to keep you here just because we need you. What we need is for you to be happy, to be complete. What if I fail? Then you come home," my father said. "This land will always be here for you. But you won't know if you're good enough if you don't try." The day I left, the whole family was there. My mother packed food enough for a week. The twins hugged me awkwardly. My father was the last. He put his hands on my shoulders, his blind eyes looking in my direction. Your legacy isn't in the land, it's in your music, he said. Promise you'll always come from an honest place. That you'll never sing about something you haven't felt. That's the difference between a musician and an artist. I promise, Dad. I walked down the dusty road, my guitar in one hand and a suitcase in the other. I turned once to wave, seeing my family grouped in front of the house. And as I walked, I began singing softly a new song I'd been composing. My father arrived here at day's end, long ago on a tired horse. He was poor and young and only wanted to plant with calloused hands of a farmer. It was our story, and now I would carry it to the world. 10 years later I found myself on a stage in Nashville, before hundreds of people. My name was on posters, my songs played on the radio. But success hadn't changed what was essential. Every song I wrote still came from that deep place of true experience, of lived pain, of known love. In the audience was my family. My mother, older but still strong. My father, still blind but at peace with himself. The twins, now men who managed the ranch. And to my surprise, Michael had come after all those years. We hugged and cried. Brothers finally reunited. That night I played the song about my father, about his journey, his struggle, his loss and his redemption. And when I finished, I understood something fundamental. I had learned that pain is inevitable, but meaningless suffering doesn't have to be. We can transform our pain into something that strengthens us, that connects us with others. Music hadn't been my escape, it had been my way of honoring every loss, of ensuring every moment of pain meant something. Because there's no point in a singer's chest if laughter blooms where the living consciousness of what pain is was planted. And it's precisely that consciousness that allows us to create something truly beautiful, truly meaningful.